The first officer thought I was joking when I reached for the handles. That's the part I remember most clearly. Not fear, not shouting, confusion. His hand touched my wrist like someone stopping a friend from making a social mistake. And for one strange second, nobody in that cockpit understood what was happening. People assume airline disasters begin with alarms, explosions, violent turbulence, some obvious mechanical failure. But sometimes catastrophe begins quietly, with exhaustion, with silence, with a professional smiling politely while his mind deteriorates behind his eyes. I spent 21 years in aviation, thousands of flight hours, perfect evaluations, no disciplinary history, no failed medical reviews. People trusted me because calmness becomes authority in that profession. Passengers never see pilots as ordinary men. We become part of the machine to them. Uniforms, checklists, measured voices over intercom systems. You stop looking human after a while. I was married, 2 sons, small house near the water. The kind of life people describe as stable because nothing dramatic appears on the surface. But professions built around precision create strange emotional habits. Pilots are trained to compartmentalize everything. Fear, fatigue, grief. You lock emotions away because hesitation at 30,000 feet can kill people. The problem is, eventually you forget how to unlock them again. My closest friend died unexpectedly during the winter. Heart attack. 43 years old. I attended the funeral on 3 hours of sleep before flying home the next morning. People kept hugging me, asking whether I was all right. And I kept answering the same way. I'm fine. Professionals become very skilled at saying that sentence. The frightening thing about psychological collapse is how ordinary it feels while it's happening. I stopped sleeping properly first, then eating regularly. Then time itself started feeling distorted. Entire days blurred together. I'd arrive home without remembering the drive. Sometimes my wife would ask questions, and I'd realize I hadn't processed a single word she said. Aviation culture discourages weakness in subtle ways. Nobody says, "Don't seek help." They don't need to. You already understand the consequences. Medical reviews, psychological evaluations, temporary suspension, possibly permanent grounding. So instead, people hide deterioration professionally. They drink more coffee, sleep less, smile harder, and continue transporting hundreds of strangers through the sky while privately unraveling. I started experimenting with substances after the funeral. Nothing that felt dangerous at the time, just small attempts to interrupt grief long enough to sleep. That's how intelligent adults justify terrible decisions, as temporary solutions. I told myself I needed rest, mental quiet, relief. Instead, my brain began slipping further away from reality. By the week of the flight, I had barely slept in nearly 2 days. 40 hours maybe, possibly more. I stopped counting because numbers felt unreliable. Light looked wrong. Voices sounded distant. At one point, I stared at my own reflection in an airport restroom and genuinely struggled to recognize myself. But I still showed up professionally. That's the horrifying part. Nobody stopped me because nothing outwardly appeared broken yet. The flight itself felt strangely dreamlike from the beginning. Cold cockpit air, instrument lights, radio chatter humming softly through headsets. Everything looked artificial somehow, like a simulation of normality. I remember staring out the windshield, thinking the clouds didn't look real. Then I started wondering whether any of it was real. People ask what I was thinking when I reached upward. The truth is difficult to explain. Part of me understood exactly what those handles controlled. Another part believed I was trapped inside some kind of waking nightmare. And in that distorted state, the idea entered my head that shutting everything down might wake me up. That's the thought that nearly killed innocent people. Not hatred, not revenge. Confusion. The first officer who questioned me afterward kept staring at my hands. I noticed that before I noticed the handcuffs. Pilots' hands matter to people. They expect steadiness, precision, control. Mine were shaking so badly, I had to sit on them. I kept asking whether the passengers were alive. Not because I didn't know, because I needed to hear someone else say it. They landed safely. The officer repeated that sentence 3 separate times. And every time he said it, I felt confused instead of relieved. Like my mind hadn't fully returned yet. Sleep deprivation does strange things to memory. Entire conversations disappear. Hours fold together. Reality becomes unreliable. By the time investigators interviewed me, I wasn't completely certain which parts of the previous days had actually happened. They asked whether I intended to kill everyone on board. That question followed me for years afterward. Intent. Such a clean legal word, as if the mind always arrives somewhere deliberately. I told them I thought I was dreaming. Even now, that sounds absurd spoken aloud. But exhaustion removes the border between thought and reality very slowly. You don't notice it disappearing until it's already gone. The terrifying thing is this. Nobody around me realized how unstable I'd become. Not the airline, not my coworkers, not even my family. Because professionalism is camouflage, especially in aviation. Pilots are trained to sound calm while systems fail. You can be psychologically collapsing while sounding completely competent over a headset. After the incident, every news station used the same photographs of me. Uniform pressed perfectly. Smiling beside aircraft. Family portraits. Vacation pictures. People kept saying the same thing. He doesn't look dangerous. I used to replay that sentence constantly. Because they were correct. I didn't look dangerous. That's why the story frightened people. The investigators eventually reconstructed the timeline precisely. The lack of sleep, the psychological deterioration, the substances I took, trying to numb grief instead of confronting it. One doctor described my condition as temporary dissociation under neurological exhaustion. Another called it a catastrophic break from reality. Both explanations sounded too clinical, too clean. What actually happened felt uglier than medical language. I stopped trusting my own mind after that flight. That was the real sentence, not the hearings, not the public humiliation, not losing my license, losing certainty inside my own thoughts. Do you understand how frightening that is for someone trained to make decisions thousands of feet above the earth? My sons visited me once during the legal proceedings. They tried to act normal. Children do that when adults are collapsing. One of them asked whether I would ever fly again. I told him probably not. He nodded like he already knew the answer. Then he asked something worse. He asked whether I meant to hurt people. I still don't fully know how to answer that question. Because intention becomes complicated when reality itself starts breaking apart. And somewhere between exhaustion and delusion, 80 strangers trusted an unconscious man with their lives. The airline industry prefers stories with obvious villains. Drunk pilots, reckless pilots, corrupt pilots. Those are easier to explain. What happened to me was harder, because it forced people to acknowledge something uncomfortable. Human beings do not stop deteriorating simply because they wear uniforms. After sentencing, I rented a small apartment near the coast. Nothing expensive. No framed certifications on the walls. I stopped watching airplanes for a while. The sound of engines overhead made my chest tighten. Like hearing ghosts pass above the building. Sometimes I wake before dawn, convinced I'm still inside that cockpit. Dim instrument lights. Cold windows. The smell of coffee and electrical systems. And for a few seconds, I can still feel my hand reaching upward. That moment repeats more accurately than almost anything else in my life. Because the brain preserves catastrophe carefully. People occasionally write to me now. Some call me a monster. Others call me a victim. Both descriptions feel incomplete. Monsters imply intention. Victims imply innocence. I don't think I qualify as either anymore. I speak to support groups sometimes. Pilots, paramedics, surgeons. People whose professions require constant composure. And I tell them something most industries refuse to admit. Competence can hide deterioration for an extremely long time. Long enough to become dangerous. That's the real horror of what happened. Not violence. Not sabotage. Not even the near disaster itself. It's the fact that nobody on board that aircraft knew anything was wrong until the exact moment I touched those handles. The passengers trusted the system completely. The crew trusted me completely. And I trusted myself right up until the second I no longer could. I used to believe danger announced itself clearly. Sweating, rage, panic, instability. But the most dangerous moment of my life arrived quietly. Inside a professional cockpit. At cruising altitude. While everyone still believed they were safe.